Yeah, welcome to the webinar, everyone. We're going to be walking through Silver Efex Pro and talking about some of the facets which I find useful when converting color images to black and white. As we transition into this, I'm going to be launching the Nik plugin, Silver Efex Pro, specifically from Photolab 4 today. So this is what we're doing today. We are converting color portraits into black and white, and I want to walk you through the interface. There's a lot of new stuff within the newest version of Silver Efex Pro. The interface looks slightly different than it did before. For folks who'd been using it before, maybe this current version. Yeah, let's jump into it. 39 new high-fidelity black and white film grains. Those are super cool. Okay, I'll show you those as well. Let's begin with this image, and we're going to launch from Photolab here. So we're here within our raw processor. Photolab actually has done a little bit of magic to this image right off the bat for us because of the way I have it set up with the Photolab defaults, and the image will be sort of optimized on its own. The original capture, and I'm not sure, it depends on the brightness of your screen and how you're viewing this webinar, but there's actually some detail in his ear and in the back of his head here. And it works nicely. I love this separation in the background, but I want to sort of create a really dramatic image. And we're going to do that within Silver Efex Pro. But Photolab is doing a nice job to kind of pull out the textures and the details. And then we'll be able to massage those tones as we convert from color to black and white. I will just mention that like one or two of the photos that we're dealing with today are shot in studio with studio lighting. The rest are all natural lit. And we're starting with this image because for the most part, it's been controlled in the studio. So all of the work is kind of being done in camera, which ideally it can be done that way. But we're going to massage it and convert it from color to black and white. To do that, if you follow my cursor into the lower right corner, I clicked the Nik collection button down here. That's how you access the Nik collection, or one of the ways to access the Nik collection from Photolab 4. And what we'll do is jump into Silver Efex Pro 3 here within the plugin selector. Now, when we click on the button, what's going to happen, and this is almost exactly the same for anyone who's an Adobe Lightroom user, what's going to happen is our raw image is going to be duplicated, and we're going to have a TIFF file by default that we're going to be able to process with. Now, Silver Efex Pro has launched, and this is informing us of just a little extra tidbit saying that because we're dealing with a TIFF file, we can work in a parametric or a non-destructive way, meaning when we're done within Silver Efex Pro 3, we can save or apply the adjustments that we make, the conversion that we make, and later on we can actually come back and reprocess the image if we want to, because we've got this nice 16-bit per channel TIFF file. Now, this is going to pop up every time we launch the software, and that's because I leave this setting on so that when we come into webinars, you can see exactly what's going to happen. Let's say like the first time you launch the software. Once you know what these prompts say, you can just click the Do Not Show Again checkbox, click the OK button. Those go away. You don't have to worry about it anymore. Now, you see our newly redesigned interface here for Silver Efex. I say we, I sort of include myself. I don't actually work for DxO, although would be, I'm proud to partner with them to get to, have the opportunity to talk to you about the software in this way. Anyways, all of the functionality that you know and love is still here. It just maybe looks a little bit different. So let's not dwell on that. I'm going to move over into the left-hand side. There are 58 presets that are built in, and I actually want to start with one of these presets. We're going to go into the 25th anniversary set. There are 10 of these, and there are several black and white presets that are just built into the software, designed for portrait images. Now, any one of these, as I click on that, a live sort of preview or heads-up display on the left side will probably be just fine for this image because it's, strong photograph. When I click on one of these presets, by the way, it gives me this little warning, says adding the preset is going to basically adjust all of the tools that are happening on the right side, the adjustments that are happening on the right side will be adjusted when you click on one of those presets. Again, this is one of those prompts. If you know what's happening, you just click the don't show again and it doesn't pop up again. I'm going to go ahead and just click the enter or return button, and it's going to apply our classic portrait #1 recipe preset. Now, these presets work really nicely right off the bat, but they're maybe not perfect all the time for every single image. So I think of these as potential, as a starting point. You know, you can create your own, and you can create a look that you like, and maybe you can use that over and over again for hundreds or thousands of images possibly. Oftentimes you still might need to massage the tones a little bit, even on a really well-made recipe or preset. So I've clicked on the classic portrait. I'm going to go ahead and just click through these different ones, and you'll see the image dramatically changes based upon whatever preset that I've clicked on. And again, what's happening as I click on or click through these different presets is that the tools that are applying these adjustments, they're all over here on the right side. We're going to talk about lots of them today. Those are being augmented and changed based upon the preset that we click on. For example, if I move over to the right side of the interface and I click on global adjustments, our global adjustments dialog opens. We have all of these really fantastic tools and sliders. If I go and click on one of these different presets, notice what happens on the right side. Like, let's say just to brightness, highlights, midtones, shadows, dynamic, and maybe contrast. As I click on this classic portrait, you'll see some of these sliders adjust and change, right? Again, maybe it's not exactly perfect for what you want, but they are a great starting point. So let's actually start with that classic portrait #1. I'm going to go ahead and just minimize the presets that are over there on the left-hand side by clicking on the little triangle. It's a little expand collapse box right there on the left, or it's on the right side of the sort of preset dialog here, but I'm going to close that. Just sort of gives us a little more real estate for our image. And we're going to move over to the right-hand side of the interface. And let's go ahead and just massage this image a little bit, because I think we're most of the way there with the preset. I just want to really hone the image in a little bit more. Now, to do that, we should probably cover at least a few of these sliders. There are many sliders in here, and we are talking about these adjustments based upon portrait imagery. We're not going to be able to get into every single slider, but you do have brightness, highlights, midtones, shadows, and then dynamic brightness. We're going to use the dynamic brightness slider, and we're going to just darken the image down a little bit. And what this is going to help to do, the dynamic brightness slider, as you slide it to the left, it's going to darken the image, but it's going to attempt to retain shadow detail where it can, right? If you were to take that dynamic brightness slider to the right, which I don't think is a great idea with this image, but let's do it. We're going to take it to the right. What it's doing is it's brightening the image up, but it's trying to brighten the image while retaining highlight detail. Now, this image, you know, it was shot with a Canon EOS 5D Mark II. It's a great camera, but a lot of the details were meant to go very dark. So if I take that dynamic brightness slider to the right, you're going to see a lot of aberrations, a lot of noise that we don't want. It's just because of the way the image was shot, because it was shot a certain way for this particular look. Long story short, we're just going to take dynamic brightness to the left a little bit. That's going to darken down everything, but it's going to darken the highlights a little bit more than the shadows as we drag that down. From there, what we're going to do is actually amplify the blacks just a touch. Give that a second. And I want to add just a smidge of soft contrast. So for anyone who's brand new to Silver Efex Pro, the global adjustments here, you sort of work in order, although it's purely up to you how you want to work, obviously. But I tend to think about these global large adjustments first, and then work my way down into very specific, subtle little adjustments. So you do the big hard-hitting stuff first, and then you make your way down to the smaller things. And that's kind of how the software is laid out, where you've got brightness, some of the brightness adjustments, contrast, you know, the big adjustments as you go. And then as you move down even further into your global adjustments, you have structure. Instructor is a texture adjustment. I don't think we really even need much, if any, of it in this image. I don't, just because I think that the lighting sort of speaks for this image. We will be using structure later in the webinar. It's a really fantastic tool. What I do want to do, though, is just scroll down a little bit, and I'm going to go add some more grain to the image. So one of the newest aspects of Silver Efex Pro is actually a new grain engine. And that grain engine is, so mind you, there's this and there's original grain. And I just want to point out the differences before we kind of really move faster than what we're doing right now. The original grain, this is sort of like the holdover or the grain structure that's in the previous version of Silver Efex. And this is really nice because for folks who like using this particular grain engine, you can go in and add grain, and you can play and place the grain per pixel wherever you want. We are going to use grain in this case, but I'm going to go ahead and actually load it from a specific film type. So original grain, that is the tried and true grain system that was built into previous versions of Silver Efex. One of the new facets here, as I just do things, I'm going to take my grain per pixel slider all the way over to 500. It's just going to get rid of any grain that tool would be adding in. And we're going to move into the section that says film grain here. And in film grain, you're able to choose from a number of different film types. And what these are actual emulations of these particular film grains. So it's very specific. You know, I don't have a particular favorite at this point, but I do want a little bit of grain in here. And I want to be able to adjust the intensity of the grain in this case. So I can do that pretty quickly and easily. Oops, I don't want to bring the intensity up yet. I want to bring the grain size up a little bit so that the grain is a little bit more noticeable. And then we'll bring the intensity up. And what we're doing here is just kind of massaging the image. In fact, let's say we're done. I'm pretty happy with these results, and I could probably talk your ear off about all of these different sliders, but let's get into some different images. Before we do that, let's just look at a side-by-side. If you follow my cursor to the upper left corner area of the interface, right now we're on the single image view. Right now it's on top of each other, but if you click on this little spin button, I don't remember the name of it, there is an official term for it. If we click on that, we get a side-by-side preview. So on the left, you've got the original. On the right, you've got the enhanced with the preset that we've applied and some of the tones and adjustments that we've massaged a little bit, including the new film grain tool, which we'll use that a little bit more later in the webinar. For now, I'm happy. Let's say we're done. We click the apply button in the lower right corner when we're all done editing. Now, if for some reason you don't want to apply what you've done, you can just click the cancel button. That's probably pretty self-explanatory. But these buttons to sort of finalize or cancel the image, they're in the lower right corner here. And they work very nicely. You click the apply button. Silver Efex is going to process this image for us. It's going to bring us back over into our host piece of software. In this case, we were launching from Photolab. And we have our original raw file. And then right next to the original raw file, we will have our black and white conversion. So I'm here within Photolab. Let's launch this image into Silver Efex Pro and just get into the details that we were going to cover in the webinar. So as this launches, again, what's happening is this is a TIFF file in this case, but a separate TIFF file is created. And that's so that we can work in a non-destructive process. Again, you get these little warnings that pop up that let you know of different things. In this case, we opened a TIFF file so we can work in a non-destructive process. If you just click the OK button, that'll go away. Once you sort of, get used to what the prompts say, you just click Don't Show Again, and it won't pop up again. Now, if you want to work in that non-destructive process so that you can go back afterwards, you follow my cursor into the lower right corner. Down here in the lower right here where it says non-destructive edits, larger files. So what happens when you click that little checkbox is a little file, metadata, is embedded inside of the TIFF file. And that might be Greek to some folks, But basically, it allows you to open your image again and reprocess it here within Silver Efex or whatever Nik collection tool you're using. It doesn't matter. In the Nik collection 4, they're all going to work in that same way. All right, so I'm going to hide the presets over on the left-hand side, and we're going to pick up where we kind of left off a minute ago in this webinar, or maybe last week if you're just seeing this, or last year, depending upon when you're watching this video. So film types here within Silver Efex Pro. Follow my cursor over here to the right. The idea here is that we're going to be working in sort of these grandiose or larger sort of adjustments first, and we're going to, so the things that are going to dramatically change the image, I'm going to use first, and then I'm going to start making my way down into the minutia, the details, the very specific aspects of the image to direct your eye or the viewer's eye around the image. In this case, I kind of like the Ilford Pan 100. I was going to go for the Fomapan. Let's see the difference. Yeah, you know what? Let's go for the Ilford Pan 100 film. And this is just a really beautiful film type. As I click on it, what the film type is doing is it's applying some kind of grain. Now, this film emulation is 100 speed, 100 ISO film, so it has a very fine grain structure to it. But if you wanted to have a larger grain structure, if you wanted the grain to be more prominent in the image, that is, you can take your grain per pixel slider, slide that to the left, and you're going to see larger grain. Now, I think 1 grain per pixel isn't going to fit this image very well, but having a little bit of grain in there does kind of give it this really wonderful aesthetic, and it can be really great for problematic images where you want things to kind of blend nicely together, or images that have digital noise in them. You can overlay this kind of grain. It puts a more aesthetically pleasing, or typically it's more aesthetically pleasing, grain on the image than, let's say, just high ISO digital noise or something. Anyways, you have your grain per pixel, your grain hardness. You can choose from either one or both and adjust them. 2 of the other things that this film type is going to be adjusting are your levels and curves. So this is the curve that is associated with the Ilford Pan 100, and then the color sensitivity, right? And the color sensitivity is how the original colors in the image are actually being converted from color to black and white, because Silver Efex Pro isn't just throwing away all of this color information, it's actually using the color information for the black and white conversion. So one of the things that I'm going to do here is, instead of sticking with the Ilford Pan 100 film, I'm going to change it. I'm going to adjust it. And I'm going to go ahead and take the blue slider. I'm going to bring it to the left. And anything that's blue in the image, it's going to darken down, right? So if I slide that blue slider to the left, it's just going to darken those tones that were originally blue down. I'm going to take my yellow and my red, and I'm just going to lighten that up a little bit. And this is just going to, in this case, brighten the reds and the yellows. David's skin here is a nice dark skin tone. It creates this really beautiful sort of form in this harsh lighting environment, and I want to kind of bring out some of the beautiful light that's actually in the image. And to do that, here I'm going to hit 1 to 2. Let's zoom in. And just sort of show you what's going on there. As I change the color sensitivity, because his skin tone is primarily made up of red and yellow, because that's what all skin tones are primarily made up of in terms of digital capture and photography, you can brighten or darken his skin tone down really nicely in an interesting way. Now, of course, as I slide that red sensitivity to the right, it's going to brighten anything that's red. If you slide it to the left, it's going to darken anything that's red. So you can see aspects of the building in the background. You can see the buoys right here. Those are going to go much darker as you slide that red slider to the right. In this case, I just want to sort of highlight David a little bit and have him pop off of his clothes just a touch more. So by brightening the red and the yellow, his neutral clothes, his black jacket and his dark toned, I think it was a blue shirt, if I remember correctly, or dark blue. Those are going to stay the same, but I can sort of brighten up his skin tone a little bit to have a little contrast off of the background a touch more, using those specific color sensitivities that are, again, built into the film type that we chose. Now, another really interesting and powerful option, and I find myself using these for portraits quite often, are the color filters. They are highly transformative. I'm going to click the fit to screen mode here. It's just going to make the image a little bit smaller so we can get a sense of the whole photo. The color filter here, right now we're on the gray color filter, which is no color filter. This is just default. There's no color filter being applied to this. But these color filters are actually working like a glass color filter would when shooting black and white film, in so much as they change the perceived transmission of light. Long story short, if you click on the red color filter, it's emulating what a glass red color filter, red 25A red color filter would do when shooting black and white film. It's going to brighten anything red, and on that portion of the color spectrum or color wheel, it's going to darken down anything on the opposite end of the color wheel, right? So red is going to, you can see, brighten up his skin quite a bit. Yellow is going to do that, but at a different extent. If we click on blue, his skin tone is going to darken down. The sky is primarily blue. It's going to get really bright. So it's kind of an interesting way of working. And in fact, usually the blue color filter isn't terribly becoming for a portrait, usually. But it can be really interesting for a portrait. In a lot of portrait work that I've seen in traditional black and white film, as well as personally in my own black and white conversions, if I'm going to use the color filter, I tend to gravitate towards orange and yellow. They're a little bit more subtle than red. Red can be really punchy. But another really interesting aspect of Silver Efex is that you have your sort of 5 traditional color filters. But if you click on the word details, you can actually create your own strength and your own hue. You can adjust the color filter. So if I bring the strength up, I can, dial that way in. I'm in yellow, or I've clicked on orange right now. But watch what happens if I click on hue and I start dragging that around. So we can create any color filter we want, which is really pretty cool. We're going to go back to an orange, and I'm just going to dial that back down to like 30% or so it's a little bit more subtle. But now we've got this nice contrast, and we've got this lovely color filter application. Let's just take a look at the before and after using the compare button up here in the top. This is the original black and white conversion. So it works, it's fine, right? It's a nice conversion, but by applying our film type and massaging those things and adjusting the color filter a little bit, this is where we're at now. So now we have a little bit more of a punchy contrast overall, and David sort of sticks up off of the background that much more. He separates. Now, when the image was shot, it was shot at like f8 or f11 or something like that. So it's a wider depth of field. So you can see the Rochester city skyline in the background a little bit. And it's in focus. Now, oftentimes with portraits, it's probably better to shoot with a shorter depth of field, lots of times. And in which case, maybe we wouldn't need to separate David so much if I had shot this at a shorter depth of field. I like the city in the background. I think it balances the image nicely. I love the leading lines and how that's working. So I stuck with, I think it was f8. We can actually look at that as we move back over into Photolab. But anyways, we can know and understand our post-processing tools so that when we're out in the field shooting, we know that we can separate David off of the background. Or we know that we can use control points to maybe darken this sky down a little bit more, which is going to separate the sky from the bridge, which is separating, the water and so on. So let's start to do that. We've worked with color filters, we've worked with film types. These are these dramatic changes to the overall image. Let's click on selective adjustments and add some control points. Now, control points, in my mind, are probably the most important. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. They're the most important facet of the different tools within the collection. These control points allow us to target certain areas or objects within the photograph and control them. So I've clicked on the Add Control Point button here on the right-hand side. I'm going to go ahead and just add a control point into the sky here, and I'm going to increase the size, right, using this area of influence slider. So here's the anatomy of this control point right now. You have the point itself. It's highlighted in gold because it's on, it's enabled, right? And you'll see that's going, when we add another control point later, that will be grayed out. It's there, it's accessible, but it's not active. Gold means active. Now, this slider that pops off of the control point, this is the area of influence. So this is the size of the point, right? Or what the point is going to be looking at to make its selection. Now, instantly, when we drop the control point on this sky, it's making the selection of the sky for us. And then if you follow my cursor over to the right-hand side, we are within the selective adjustments section. We clicked the add control point button. We have one control point in a list. As we add more control points, more they will be added into this list. And if we make our way down, we have all of our different controls for our control point. Now, color selectivity, we're going to cover that on the next image. It's a way to control what this control point is selecting. So, when we place the point, it automatically makes the selection. Luminance and chrominance, these two sliders, allow us to kind of massage the selection that's being made by that point. Again, we'll get into that on the next image. For now, we're going to scroll into our different contrast adjustment tools: brightness, contrast, structure, amplify whites, and so on and so forth. Every point has these set of sliders, right? So we can go and take that sky and we can darken it down, right? And what you'll notice is that it makes this really photographic looking adjustment as I take that brightness slider down. Maybe if I move into my selective tones, which, by the way, this is brand new within Silver Efex Pro 3, the selective tonal adjustments built into control points are enabling us to adjust just the midtones of whatever the control point is selecting, or just the shadows, or just the highlights based upon, what we want to adjust. In this case, as I take all of these sliders way too far. In this case, I want to kind of darken down that blue sky a little bit. And I want to do that throughout the entire sky, right? So we placed our point, we've made some adjustments, and now I'm saying, okay, well, I actually want this point to adjust the entire sky. There are two ways to do that. You can either click on the area of influence slider, and you can expand that around the entire object or sky, right? And it's going to do its best to make its selection of the sky. But the problem that we run into is the control point is making its selection based upon tone, color, and texture of the original image, and some other stuff as well. But basically, tone, color, and texture of the place that you've placed the point. Well, the blue sky right here is a very similar tone and texture to the blue of the reflection of the water, right? So it's the water here is reflecting the blue sky, and therefore you are seeing, some adjustment being made because this control point has a massive area of influence. If we actually shrink this down to make it a little bit smaller, the selection is going to be a little bit more concise, a little bit more in just the area where the point or the area of influence is. And we can actually duplicate this point and place it a couple times in different areas of the sky or in different parts of the image to get the exact same adjustment, but in different parts. So we place the point. The way that I'm going to duplicate the control point right now is I'm just going to hold the Option key down on my Mac. If you're on a PC, you'd hold Alt down. And while you're holding Option or Alt, click on the control point you want to duplicate and drag it away. So that made a duplicate of the original point. If we want another one, you just hold down Option, click, and drag. It's a very fast, efficient way of making another control point that is going to be doing exactly the same thing as those other points. Now let's see if we can do one more. I'm going to stick this below the bridge line here. It's going to do a nice job. So now what we've done, we've taken these control points and we've sort of massaged the tones a little bit to create some more layering within the photograph, right? This image it's a two-dimensional plane. I'm photographing a three-dimensional plane in real life, in 3D. And you can see these nice leading lines, but by darkening the sky, but leaving the bridge its original luminosity, its original brightness level, we are getting these layers in the image. And you can go overboard. It's easy to add maybe too many layers and really get very specific. But you could spend some time in here using control points to dodge and burn different areas of the image to direct the viewer's attention through the image. Now, the way that I think about this is that the human eye is going to be attracted to the human form, right? So obviously this is a portrait of David here. He's standing basically in the middle of the image, so it's kind of easy to know what the subject is. It's a relatively simple composition, I guess, is what I'm getting at there. By adding in my control points, I'm able to, let's delete that control point as I'm talking. By the way, to delete a control point, it just needs to be active, and then you click the delete button there on the right side of the interface. So you can see a little trash can there with the active control point. We're not going to do that with this image, or sorry, this control point. What we are going to do is just brighten David's face up just a touch. Anyways, the human eye is going to be attracted to the human form, human face, and then the brightest and most contrasty areas within the photograph. And then your eye sort of whittles away at these different areas based upon the composition within the image. So if I want to attract your eye as the viewer, oftentimes I'm going to add contrast to a particular area in the image, or I'm going to reduce contrast in an area where I don't want you to look. Like the 5-star building, this large building back here in the background, it's very contrasty. Maybe we don't need it to be. Maybe we want it to be slightly darker. Well, we drop a control point on it. We go ahead and take the brightness level down. Maybe move into our highlights slider. We bring that down a little bit. We bring the midtones down. I think I might be taking it too far right now, but you can get a sense. By darkening that building down, your eye isn't driven directly back to it as much as it was. In fact, if we move into our control points list, so here we've got 10 control points on the image now. If I turn that off and we look at the before and after of that one point, okay, so the before, the building's very bright, and if you sort of lean back in your chair and you look, your eye is going to be drawn back to that large white square, the building. As I turn the control point back on, you'll see that adjustment, and I need to drop it exactly in the right place here. I think maybe I had. And there we go. I'm going to make 2 points, one right here and one right there. There we go. That one's just a little bit too dark up at the top of the building now. But now what I'm doing is I'm really controlling the different areas of the image to direct your attention as the viewer, right? So again, dropping control points, maybe darkening down and reducing contrast in areas where I don't want you to look necessarily, and placing control points and adding contrast in the areas where I do want you to look, right? And the reason why I'm going to add contrast right near David, but in the background, is that's going to sort of pull your eye a little bit more towards the center. Let's see about adding some structure to that water, see if we can get a little bit more texture out of the water. That's looking pretty good. And here's the thing. I could add control points until the cows come home, right? You know, I can just keep dropping control points, and I could keep going here. I don't think I need to for the demonstration. I think I would if I were to be actually sort of processing this image, aside from demonstration purposes. I would go in and I'd add control points to not every object within the image, but all of the facets of the photograph that I need to adjust to direct your eye. And my goal in this case is to direct your eye towards David and to allow you to look around the image, but without the rest of the photo being overly distracting, right? And in fact, if we look at a side-by-side preview here, I'm going to tap the tab key on my keyboard. So if you lean back in your chair, and maybe I've gone a little bit too bright with his skin tone, looking at his original skin tone. Bring that back down. He has a really nice skin tone. There we go. I like the added contrast, and I want to attract your eye, but I don't necessarily want to really change the directive. Okay, so on the left is the original image. It works, it's fine, it's nice. And on the right is our massaged image where we've used a film type, a color filter, the orange color filter as we've adjusted it, and then a bunch of control points to really direct the viewer's attention, your eye, my eye, whoever's looking at it, towards David, and then the rest of the image to kind of tell the story of a Rochester, New York resident. Wow, if I could speak. Okay, now we're all done with this image. We've used some control points. Let's click the apply button. It's going to bring us back over into Photolab. I'm just going to walk us through one more image for the demonstration, and we'll call it a day, because I don't want to take too much of everyone's time right now watching a recorded video. So here we've got Ellie. I'm going to actually crop this image. So we're going to go into the crop here within Photolab 4. The original aspect ratio, I'm going to go ahead and say unconstrained. Let's crop this. I'm just going to get rid of some of the white in the bottom because that becomes a little bit distracting. And let's get rid of a little bit of the top as well. Maybe I should have changed this to a 2:3 ratio. But anyways, I'm going to apply that. And let's convert this image from color to black and white. I want to talk to you about how these, the new facet of control points work within Silver Efex. So if you're brand new to the Nik collection, again, like I said, the control points are a really important facet, in my mind anyways, of utilizing the tools to the fullest extent. But one of the beauties of the software is that you don't have to use anything. You can literally just click on presets on the left-hand side and get really cool, really great results. I would imagine, though, if you're listening to the webinar, this presentation, you're interested in doing more. You're interested in learning more about how these different facets work. So the control points are strange to get used to at first, because you just literally take the point, you place it on a thing, let's say like her bib here, and size the area so that it encompasses the entire object that you want to adjust. And then you can go in and, adjust, right? And the idea here is that the control point makes the selection for you, so then you can just decide what processing you want, how bright you want it to be, how much contrast you want in that area. And so on and so forth. Or, another funny thing. So the bib is a magenta color. It's not like pink, basically. In Silver Efex Pro, you do have the ability to use a selective colorization. So we could actually reintroduce the color back into our black and white image. And that has some really interesting applications, and you can do some really creative work there. But I like to show it because it kind of shows you the selection that's being made. Right? The control point knows it should be selecting this bib. It's selecting it based upon the point that we dropped it on. If we move it somewhere else, you can actually watch the selection and adjustment change. And then it's also trying to create this photographic looking selection, not just cut something out, but a photographic looking selection. And there's quite a lot of light that is bouncing off of the bib and reflecting onto Ellie's chin here. Right? And so that's going to make her chin a little bit magenta, a little bit pink. I guess it is pink. It's just straight pink here. And so when I add in the selective colorization, or if I take my brightness slider and I darken that down, it is also going to affect the light that's reflected into her chin. The idea is that it looks clean, it looks photographic, it looks probably real or physically real as to what could actually happen. So, that's what control points are doing. It allows you to select an object without you having to do any work, and then you just decide what sort of adjustments you want done. Now, if the control point isn't doing exactly what you want it to do, in so much as it's not selecting exactly the area that you want, you do have some recourse. You can change the size of the area of influence. So I can go ahead and click on this little slider. Oops, hopefully. So I can click on the little slider and I can drag it down. Right now I'm making a much smaller selection. I can go ahead and click on the slider, I can drag it up. It's making a much larger selection. That's one way of controlling it. The other, or another way in tandem with sizing the area of influence, is using the luminance and chrominance sliders. Here, with each individual control point, you have the ability to adjust the luminance of the selection of the control point or the chrominance of the selection of the control point. And luminance is the brightness level, and chrominance just means the color and saturation level of the object that you've placed the point on. Now, if you follow my cursor to my control points list, and I click on this little box here on the right side, the little circle in this box, if I click on it, that's showing me the selection that this control point is currently making. Anything that's white is being selected by this control point. So any adjustments I make, it's going to affect any of that white stuff here. So it does a good job to cut out the love you a brunch or a bunch. But it's doing a nice job to kind of select out just the bib. As you move the control point, you can actually see as the selection changes, right? If I put it on her face, right, put it on her eye, just selects out her eyes. If I shrink this down, watch how the selection changes. It's just going to select her eye, right? And a little bit around it to make a clean photographic looking selection. Now, what we were getting at though is how the luminance and chrominance slider works. So right now we are within the mask, right? We've turned the mask on in the control points list. So we're seeing kind of the default selection that the control point is making at that size. Now, if we go into our luminance slider and I slide this to the left, what's going to happen is the control point is going to kind of broaden its selection, and it's going to broaden the selection based upon the brightness that we've got. So if I slide luminance or chrominance to the left, we get a more broad selection, to the point where if I slide both of them to 0, it's just a circle, right? But as I get more precise, or as I kind of work my way in using the slider to the right, I'm able, by moving the slider to the right that is, I'm able to really hone in the selection so that I'm getting just what I want. Now in this case, maybe I'll leave it a little bit more broad, because I would kind of expect that because the pink in her bib is so prominent, let's turn that mask off for a second. Because the pink in her bib is so prominent, the light is going to be reflecting and affecting other areas. So I actually don't want the most precise selection that control point can make. I want it to be relatively subtle, actually. But somewhere where maybe I want a more precise control point, maybe is within her eye. So if we click the control points, so I'm adding a control point into her eye, let's size that area of influence so that it's only going to encompass her eye. I'm going to hit 1 to 2. We're going to zoom in a little bit. Let's place the control point exactly where we want it to be. And let's turn on the selection so we can see what the control point is selecting. Right? It's doing a really nice job. Actually, we can clean this up a little bit by adding another control point. I know that's new. If I click on the control point button and I add a new control point and I turn off that selection, now what's happening is this second control point is going to help us to kind of clean up or hone in our first selection. Now, I'm going to click on the original control point and we're going to move into luminance, and we're just going to slide that a little bit to the left so that we can kind of hone in the selection a little bit more. I'm going to slide chrominance a little bit to the, I took luminance to the right. I'm going to take chrominance to the left a little bit to select a little bit more of the color within her eye. And now as we do this, let's make it a little bit more broad. Yeah, that's good. As we do this, you can see the precise selection that the control point's making based upon where you place the point. It gets very specific in the iris as well, because she's got a bunch of different colors and textures in her iris. Now, right? Yeah. Okay, so let's turn that off. Now, you don't have to have the mask on to use the luminance and chrominance slider, but the thing that you want to think about is you're not going to see any change occur unless you have like an adjustment being made. So let's say we add a bunch of structure into her eye and a little bit of contrast. Let's take the highlights and see if we can brighten the highlights up a little bit, and a little bit with the midtones, and then a little bit with the shadows. We'll darken the shadows down just a touch. Oop, too much. Okay, so now I don't need to make any changes. Let's say I'm happy with the resulting adjustment and control point. But if we wanted to, if I go back to luminance and chrominance now, again, I'm just saying you don't have to turn on the selection to see what's happening. You just have to have some adjustment made so that you can get a sense of what's happening. And in fact, usually at this point, I don't personally use the selection, the show hide control point selection button all that often. I do in demonstration to show how it works. But what I prefer to do is make an adjustment and then hone the adjustments, luminance and chrominance, while I'm looking at my area that's being affected. right? Because then I'm going to get exactly what I want. I don't have to worry about the, exactly what the selection is doing, as long as the object or area is being adjusted the way that I want it to be. Let's brighten up that eye a little bit. Now, let's finish this image. I'm actually going to click on a color filter. I should have done this at the very beginning, but there's some really fun stuff that you can do. And I know in the webinar, we talked about how I usually wouldn't use the blue color filter for a portrait, but actually on Ellie here, it's kind of cute, and it works nicely to create a really kind of interesting aesthetic. I think I added too much contrast and texture overall to her eyes, but let's run with this. We're going to go into the finishing adjustments, and I'm just going to use a lens vignette, black frame. Let's do lens fall off. And let's adjust that. So within the finishing adjustments, you have the ability to tone the image. You have a vignette tool. We're going to make this rectangular. We're going to darken down the vignette just a little bit. And this is going to just, again, push the viewer's attention towards our subject. And then I think now that I've done these big, broad global things, I actually want to go back into my localized adjustments, my control points. I'm just going to add a control point to her forehead here and brighten her up just a touch. There we go. Nice contrast. Let's put this on her nose. Based upon where you place the control point, you can get a slightly different response as well. So you might decide, oh yeah, that looks good, or you might move it around to get exactly what you want. Long story short, that's a lot of the new features and tools within Silver Efex. It's a very powerful piece of software for converting color images to black and white. And in my mind, it's just a really fun tool to use that can be optimized for speed, or you can just play within it to get really unique, interesting sorts of adjustments. I'm going to click the apply button, and I'm going to go ahead and call that a day. So I think we covered almost everything that I wanted to get into in our webinar, but I greatly appreciate that you were stopping by on your Friday to hang out, and thanks a lot, everyone.